I'm Jim Anderton, and this is the Industry Insights and Trends podcast. On this show, we'll explore the length and breadth of 21st century engineering, from civil engineering mega projects to innovation at the quantum level. We speak with subject matter experts and industry watchers from every sector of the engineering discipline.
Joining me on the podcast today is the president and founder of the Reshoring Initiative, Harry Moser. Harry, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, great to be here, Jim. Great to be here. Great to be back.
Harry, we have talked for years about reshoring, and you are the founder of the Reshoring Initiative. And suddenly, it's one of those situations where after 20 years, an overnight success, suddenly everyone's talking about reshoring. It's all over the media, every place. And you've sort of been out there waving the flag for this thing forever, haven't you?
It started 15 years ago. And at the time, I believed we'd have some success. Most people thought we would not, and we've had much more than I expected. Of course, we've had COVID, we've had tariffs, we've had Biden with his, hundreds of billions of dollars worth of incentives. I've had a little help, from those around me, but overall, even before they got on board, even before that, there was a continuous, gradual climb, such that in 2010, when I founded it, we identified 11,000 jobs coming back in that year. And in 2024, we identified in the year 244,000. And it's been more or less continuous up to that point. So it's been very gratifying.
Yeah. Now, before we dive in the nitty gritty of this, and there is a lot to talk about, can you tell me a little bit about the Reshoring Initiative?
Yeah, well, our mission is to balance the goods trade deficit. And that deficit in 2024 was a record 1.2 trillion with a T, okay? And to balance that, to reduce imports and increase exports by 1.2 trillion will require a 40% increase in U.S. manufacturing, something like 4 or 5 million more manufacturing workers, and we don't have enough today. So, but if you're going to bring the work back, you need the workers, you need the facilities, you need the equipment, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's our objective, and we achieve it with, you might say, 4 pillars. First is we document it. We're the only source of data that has that curve. We know what companies, what industries, what products came back from what countries to what cities for what reasons, that whole thing. Okay, so we document, and one reason we document it is that company B can see company A did it, and therefore company B says, well, maybe we ought to try it. So we document, we promote. Well, I'm doing this with you, and at the moment I'm doing 2 or 3 podcasts or webinars a week, and a bunch of live in the field, and writing a couple articles a month, and getting interviewed once a week, something like that. And so we promote, we enable. So we have various tools that help the companies make the decisions or implement it. And then we advocate. So we try to convince the government to make it easier, what we call leveling the playing field, to make it so that the obstacle to get over, to bring the work back, wouldn't be so intimidating.
Yeah. Now, you have recently published a report, which is a very timely report, given the situation going on in American manufacturing right now. Can you tell me a bit about your report?
Okay, we actually did 2 in the last week. It was tough. Anyway, the one I think you're referring to is the results of our first quarter 2025 reshoring survey. So the first survey
Correct.
We've ever done, and we got 500 responses, which is a lot of responses, for us, as opposed to Deloitte or KPMG or something like that. So you got 500 responses. And I think it was the first time ever that anyone has separated OEMs from contract manufacturers, supply chain companies. And they have different perspectives. And yet those contract manufacturers do a huge percentage of the actual manufacturing that takes place. There's a certain number of people at the assembly plant, but there's all these hundreds of companies making parts that feed up into there. So they're very important part of the team. So I'm glad we're able to get them involved. And some of the conclusions we got, first, of the companies that have reshored, 95% were either satisfied or relatively satisfied. So only 5% were dissatisfied. So I was pleased with that. I think one of the most noteworthy, timely things we did, we asked the companies to compare 5 different, more or less Trump-like policies. So like a 15% tax, tariff on everything, lower corporate income taxes, lower dollar, less deregulation, okay, less regulations, and finally a workforce that has the quality and quantity of skills that the company needed. And in each case, we asked them to say what percentage of what you import would you reshore, and lo and behold, the workforce got the highest rating. The company said they'd bring more work back if they could get the workforce than with tariffs or dollar or taxes or regulations or anything else. And that's what I thought might happen, but I was delighted with it. So we're trying to get that message to President Trump that for the money you'd have to spend to get the workforce going is a fraction of what like Biden gave away to get people to build the chips and the EV batteries and so on. So I think it's very important that way. We found one of the things that we promote is the use of total cost of ownership to help companies add up all the relevant costs and risks when they're making a decision where to source something. And only 30% of the big companies use that. The other 70 look just at the price or maybe the landed cost or something like that. And therefore, just getting them that 70% to use total cost, that alone would bring back 1 million or 2 million jobs. Some of the driving forces that companies identified that were bringing things back were having engineering near manufacturing. So when you have them close together and in the same time zone, same language, they can help each other and they can come out with a better result. When you're far apart, different languages, tougher to do. So that was one of the top ones. Another one was a geopolitical risk. So companies are aware of the risk of war over Taiwan. And if that happened, we're going to get cut off from Taiwan and China for 6 months, a year, who knows how long. And so the smart companies are looking at that and saying, well, what can we bring back? And we say, well, do the TCO at least bring back the ones where you'll be equally or more profitable by bringing them back here and as insurance against that happening. But only 38% of the OEMs have actually picked products or even trying to identify products to start bringing back as a form of insurance. Another, maybe a last, I think, interesting insight, 43% of the companies said that they would pay 10 to 20% more for a product with 1 week delivery instead of 6 week delivery. And I picked 6 weeks because that's about the time from inland China to, say, Chicago by surface. Okay? And so if companies out there, if you're in that supply chain and you know your prospect is buying from China and having it shipped in, and if you can offer them a 1 week delivery, there's at least some chance that they're going to listen to you. And if you take that 10 or 20% value plus whatever else the TCO shows, you've got a chance of convincing them to buy from you, and jobs and business and profits, all those good things.
Yeah. Now, those are interesting. That analysis is interesting, especially that last point in that we think of supply chains. And of course, you're right. A purchasing agent who's buying inputs, if you're buying cap screws or you're buying, unijunction transistors, it's about unit cost. It's basically how cheaply can I get this product. On the other hand, if it's a 6 or 8 week lead time to get that product, and you are in turn using those inputs in a product which has to then be shipped to a customer that might require just-in-time delivery, and we see that with the tier 1 and tier 2 community all the time, you're starting to do things like carry inventory to protect yourself against a potential supply outage. And there's a cost to doing that too. Is it possible that one of the reasons why it's taken a while for reshoring to really catch fire like it is that have all manufacturing firms really thought closely about the total cost of your supply chain rather than just the price of the goods?
That's what our survey said, that only 30% of them say they're using total cost. And I suspect they're not getting as much total as we would suggest that they should use. So that's the case. Just an interesting anecdote. I saw a study that KPMG, big auditing and consulting company, that they did, and they asked they had a client, and they did a study, and they said that we're going to move the work from the U.S. to China, somewhere like that, and we're going to save 50 million on labor. So big money. Okay, they audited after it was done, and what actually happened, they saved the 50 million on labor, but it cost them 25 million for duty and freight, and it cost them 25 million of inventory carrying costs, which wiped out the 50, and then they had 7 million of penalties for late deliveries to their customers. So they came off 7 million worse instead of 50 million better off. Okay, very consistent with what our TCO estimator would have suggested.
I mean, I think the poster boy for this for outsourcing has to have been, in my mind, the Boeing Dreamliner project, the 787. That was a sea change for that company. That's a company that used to build everything in house, and reached a point where with the Dreamliner project, they outsourced almost everything and became final assemblers of component parts. I mean, component parts so big they built a custom built giant air freighters to carry fuselages, across the Pacific Ocean to make this work. So far, the program appears to be a success, but with program accounting techniques, of course, you're declaring profit long before you've paid those costs. So the jury is still out, and I have to wonder if, as you say, in the end, you're wrangling a big management problem. If you're wrangling inputs that have to come from 5 different continents, and they've got to all converge on a place where you're assembling this stuff, and there has to be a cost from a management perspective as well as just from the physical logistics perspective. Is it worth it? Does it reach a point where you turn around and you say, you know what, up front it looks attractive, but at the end, you know what, we just have better control if we just can work with somebody 3 states over instead of 3,000 miles away?
Yeah, I think it works. I think it works pretty well with a completed end product like an iPhone. Okay, which gets in, it's boxed, everything is perfect, and you ship it. But when you have 100, like a car, and you've got 100 or 1,000 components coming in all over the world, any one of which could have a tornado or a meteor or a revolution or a war or something crazy, and so there's some small probability on each of those 1,000 facilities against them. So and any one of them can keep you from making the car. So therefore, I think what's happening is the supply chain is coming back faster than the OEM assembly. So the OEMs are smart enough to see this, and they're starting to source the machine parts, the castings, the forgings, the wire harnesses, et cetera, here to make their assemblies. And then, and specifically, we asked the contract manufacturers, what percentage of what you've been you've reshored for your customers, what percentage of it is going into assemblies that have been here for a while? And that turned out to be 75%. Only 25% was for additional assemblies that had come back. Okay, and but as the OEMs get a good experience with getting those components for their existing assemblies, then they'll start to bring back some of those other assemblies, and there'll be another flow of work. So we see the contract manufacturers, the supply chain, as benefiting hugely from this phenomenon.
Yeah, that makes sense. The contract manufacturers, one aspect of that industry that surprised me is a lot of them started off as 3D printing houses, or they're advanced technology providers of very specialized types of manufacturing. And more, I hear them talking about, well, we're buying 5-axis machine tools, or we're buying, fabricating equipment, essentially. And I get a sense that some of them are becoming more like mainstream manufacturers. They're willing to do, higher volume, lower margin jobs and to make that work. And what I'm wondering about is that from a reshoring perspective, it's a commitment. If you're domestic, if you're in Terre Haute, Indiana, and you want to make hex bolts, basically, you're going into a high volume, low margin field with lots of overseas competitors. And if you're going to buy, $2 million worth of screw machines, you've got to have some faith or some orders in hand. Basically, do you think the tariff regime is going to basically incentivize the customer base enough that these guys can go to a bank and say, let's just do it?
Yes, in many cases. Some cases, no. If the company was traditionally profitable and made good money year after year after year, the bank will loan money. If the owner believes, if he's willing to take the risk, I get calls from a lot of little companies, startups. They want to start some kind of manufacturing company. Ask them, do you know anything about manufacturing? No. Do you have any money? No. not going to be too easy. But but I mean, the thing with tariffs, one thing with tariffs, that so far they have not been designed correctly. I mean, at first it was chaotic. April 2nd was chaotic, but second, our conclusion is that tariffs should be on everything, from everywhere, forever. Okay, I'll give you the reasons for each of those. On everything, if you just do it, let's say on steel, it's good for the steel industry, but the steel industry raises its price by the 10, 20, whatever percent, and therefore they don't actually make a lot more steel because they've raised their price to the level of the imports with the tariffs, rather than the other way around, kind of thing. So the price to the machine shop and the fabricator goes up, and then those companies are no longer competitive with the imports that are buying steel for 20, 30% less. Okay, so therefore, if you're going to do steel, you got to do everything, not just steel, from everywhere. Because if you don't do from everywhere, the Chinese will ship the product in through Mexico or Vietnam or somewhere like that, and it'll have leakage, won't work, and forever. Because if it isn't going to be forever, then the companies will say, well, until I know that the tariffs are firm and they're going to be in place for 5 or 10 years, so I can build a factory and make a profit, and I'm not going to do it, because if I start the factory and build the factory, and a year from now there's no tariffs, I'm screwed. Okay? So on everything, from everywhere, forever.
Yeah. I can see some sense in that. It's the other aspect, of course, the thing that everyone in manufacturing is talking about is labor. It's ironic that at a time where there are ICE raids going on right now, and we're rounding people up and sending them across the southern border. At the same time, manufacturers everywhere are telling me that they need welders, they need machinists, they need experienced production personnel, and we've got an ironic situation now where I talked to one recently, from the East, who said that I'm willing to train. He said, I'm really a point where I'll take a young man or woman off the street who just shows keen interest in learning this technology. I will spend the money and take the time it takes to give them a set of really good marketable skills and do that. And they're still struggling to get enough warm bodies in there to actually make the thing work. And it's, every manufacturer, everyone hates leaving money on the table. And I'm hearing more and more about individuals who say, yeah, the problem is that it's stretching out the delivery times to the point where I feel I'm losing business and I need people. What's the solution to that crunch? Is that demographic? What happened here?
Well, part of it's demographic. The cohorts of people aren't as big, and then the economy is bigger, so there's more demand. But also, most people, partially because they're ill-informed, would prefer to do many other careers than manufacturing because they think of dark, dirty, and dangerous and all that kind of thing. Okay? And which is generally not true anymore. There are many factories that are great places to be. So manufacturing is relatively unpopular. And second, trade or skilled workforce, tool maker, welder, precision machinist, is seen as a less desirable career than getting a college degree. And it turns out that that's also incorrect. Specifically, I've read about FAME, F-A-M-E. They have an apprentice program tied to Toyota, and their statistics say that 5 or 10 years after graduating from the apprentice program, the average income is something like $98,000, which is good, better than the average college graduate who's making 60 or 70 or something like that. But I see the essence of the problem, the root cause of the problem lies with the federal government. If you go to the Department of Labor, Department of Education, you'll find website after website after website that talks about college for everyone, university degree pays off with $1 million more lifetime income than a high school degree. And they'll have these charts, and here's these number of degrees and income going up with number of degrees. And I've been working to get them to show here around the bachelor's degree the average income of someone who's passed an apprenticeship and show that it's equal, and mention that, and you start making money at 18 instead of maybe 23, and you don't pay anything for tuition, and it's really fun. But they don't give that to the guidance counselor who shows this to the parents of the kids, and therefore the kids don't think about it. So I hold the federal government significantly at fault for the condition that we have, and I'd love to see them change. I'd love to find a community or state that agrees with me, and I'd work with them to create a chart that shows the apprenticing income and see if we could prove it in the state, see if it would happen. But so I hold them responsible. Some of the things I'd like the government to do, specifically, essentially have a limited number of people coming out of high school, and right now most of them go on to college. Okay, I would cut way back on college loans. I'd make it so you only can get the money if the computer says you're going to be able to pay it off, just like any other loan that anybody takes out. It'd be a good experience to only get the money if you can pay it off. And so you cut that by 20, 30, 40%, generally in the liberal arts fields where there's not many jobs relative to the number of graduates, and then direct those kids over into apprenticeships, and I would provide apprentice loans. And so the one reason we don't have more apprentices is if the company pays 15, 16 an hour to bring them in and 20 when they're coming out, and the kid's spending a third of the time at the community college, and there's a master training them, and they're a screw up maybe in the first 6 months, the company loses money on the typical apprentice. And then by the time they're well trained and they graduate, they go to work for GM or somebody for $5 more an hour, and the employer says, screw that, I'm not going to do that again. So you pay the kid 10, and you let them borrow $5 an hour from the apprentice loan program. So maybe you've got $40,000 over 4 years, and then the employer pays it off over 5 years if the apprentice stays on and continues to work with them, right? And if the kid leaves, well, at least the employer says, oh, it's okay. I came out okay, you see? And so there's a couple of creative things like that I'd love to see the government do. But I'm not sure whom to talk to. If anybody out there has a lead, contact me at the Reshoring Initiative and put me in touch with someone that can make it happen.
Innovative solutions to complex problems. Harry, there's so much to talk about. I hope you'll come back on the podcast so we can talk more about this, because it's in the news and it is not going away. Harry Moser, president and founder of the Reshoring Initiative. Thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Bye, everybody.
That's it for today's Industry Insights and Trends podcast, brought to you by engineering.com. If you like this program and want to keep pace with the latest innovations in engineering, subscribe to our newsletters such as Design Weekly, 3D printing, aerospace and defense, digital transformation, simulation, or a weekly roundup at engineering.com/subscribe. For our deeper engineering series, visit engineering.com TV for exclusive shows like Designing the Future, Manufacturing the Future, and the Engineering Roundtable, found exclusively on engineering.com TV. Thanks for tuning in.